Hidden away from the world, something revolutionary waited in the shadows. It looked like it came straight out of science fiction. Twin booms jutting out like nothing anyone had seen before. Twin engines with turbochargers bolted on like mechanical lungs. 5 machine gun barrels staring forward in a deadly gaze. This wasn't just another fighter plane. This was a monster, and the man who created it was barely old enough to rent a car. The P-38 Lightning didn't just push boundaries, it shattered them completely. And the story of how it came to exist is darker and more controversial than most people realize. Kelly Johnson was only 27 years old when his design won Lockheed their first ever military contract, 27. Most people that age are still figuring out their lives, but Johnson was already reshaping the future of warfare. He grew up on a farm in Michigan, the 7th of 9 children, and somehow became one of the most respected aeronautical engineers in history before he could even legally run for Congress. But here's where it gets interesting. At just 23, Johnson walked into a room full of senior Lockheed executives and told them their new aircraft was garbage. The Model 10 was unstable, he said, and needed a complete tail redesign. He was a tool designer, the lowest rung on the ladder, and he was telling the bosses they were wrong. The crazy part, he was right. He had this habit of being right when everyone else was wrong, and people started listening real fast. By 28, he was Lockheed's chief research engineer. By 29, he was leading Skunk Works, the most advanced aeronautical lab that ever existed, and Skunk Works. That name came from a reeking bourbon distillery next door that smelled so bad workers joked they were working in a skunk works. The name stuck, and so did Johnson's philosophy: be quick, be quiet, be on time. 3 rules that cut through red tape like a hot knife through butter. The P-38 was born from an impossible request. The military wanted a high-altitude interceptor that could hit 360 miles per hour and climb to bomber altitude in 6 minutes from a dead stop. Almost every aircraft company in America looked at that spec sheet and laughed. It was ridiculous, but Johnson didn't laugh. He grabbed a sketch pad and started doodling configurations that would make other engineers think he'd lost his mind. Here's the problem he faced: no single American engine in the 1930s could power a heavily armed, high-speed, high-altitude fighter. 2 engines were the only option, but how do you integrate them without creating a flying brick? Johnson explored everything. Asymmetrical designs with the cockpit offset to one side. Pusher-puller configurations with engines buried in the fuselage driving propellers through long drive shafts. He left no stone unturned, sketching designs that looked more like rejected movie props than actual aircraft. Then he landed on something honestly pretty bizarre. A single fuselage in the center with no engine, just the pilot sitting behind an absolutely outrageous amount of space for guns. The engines, mounted in twin booms on either side. It was counterintuitive, weird-looking, and absolutely brilliant. With the propeller out of the way, Johnson could mount for 50 caliber machine guns and a 20mm cannon directly in the nose, all pointing straight ahead, no convergence issues. Most World War II fighters had guns mounted in the wings, which created a nightmare problem. Where should they point? Straight forward meant bullets spread out and missed. Angled inward meant they converged at one specific distance, but that distance had to be perfect for the pilot's fighting style. Ground crews had to manually realign guns based on pilot preference. It was a mess. The P-38 eliminated that completely. Point, shoot, hit. Simple as that. Only the German Bf-109 with its engine-mounted cannon came close, and even that was a compromise. The P-38 was armed to the teeth, rivaled only by monsters like the P-47 Thunderbolt, but here's where the story gets dark. As P-38 started deploying, rumors began spreading along the West Coast. Pilots were dying in training accidents, and the whispers were horrific: headless bodies. Pilots allegedly getting decapitated by their own propellers during emergency bailouts. The stories spread like wildfire, and morale started tanking. The truth: it was mostly misinformation, but there was a kernel of real danger. The twin boom design meant pilots had to worry about hitting the horizontal stabilizer during bailouts, not the propellers. Still, the rumors persisted, fueled by wartime paranoia and the aircraft's unconventional design. Some reports claim enemy propaganda pushed these stories to create fear around the Lightning. The real killer wasn't the design, though, it was thermodynamics. The P-38's twin Allison V1710 engines were paired with turbochargers, creating a complex system that pushed the limits of cooling technology. Johnson designed an innovative intercooler built directly into the wing's leading edge to reduce drag, but as engine power increased throughout the war, it couldn't dump heat fast enough. Pilots had to constantly monitor engine temperatures or risk catastrophic failure. And then, there was the compressibility problem. The P-38 had the lowest critical Mach number of any fighter in the war. During dives, airflow around the thick wing roots and engine pods would go supersonic, while the plane itself was only doing 70% the speed of sound. When this happened, lift shifted backward, pitching the nose down harder, and control surfaces stopped working. Pilots were trapped in uncontrollable dives, and some didn't make it out. Dive flaps were eventually added to give pilots enough control to pull out, but the problem was never truly fixed. Despite these flaws, the P-38 found its perfect role in the Pacific, and one mission would cement its place in history forever. April 1943, American codebreakers intercepted a transmission that made hearts stop. Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto, the mastermind behind Pearl Harbor, was flying from Rabaul to Bougainville in the Solomon Islands. He was punctual to the minute, and the Americans saw their chance for revenge. The problem: Yamamoto's flight path was 1,000 miles deep into enemy territory. No other Allied fighter had the range, speed, and firepower to pull off the mission. Only the P-38 Lightning could do it. 16 P-38s launched on what would be called Operation Vengeance. They flew wave-top level across the ocean to avoid Japanese radar, so low that spray kicked up against their canopies. They arrived exactly 1 minute early, giving them just enough time to jettison drop tanks as Yamamoto's transport broke through cloud cover. What happened next was chaos. Japanese Zero fighter swarmed to protect the transports, and a furious dogfight erupted. One P-38 reportedly took 100 for hits and kept flying. The Lightning was built tough, all-metal skin with self-sealing fuel tanks. The Zeros were fabric-covered with no protection. One solid burst could end them. Both transport bombers were shot down. Attribution was messy, and one pilot broke radio silence to claim the kill, inadvertently revealing that the Americans had broken Japanese codes. But the mission succeeded. Yamamoto was dead, reportedly found still clutching his samurai sword. The man who orchestrated Pearl Harbor was gone, and the P-38 Lightning had delivered the killing blow. The P-38 was far from perfect. Cooling problems plagued it. The compressibility issues made it dangerous in dives. It struggled against advanced single-engine fighters in Europe. But it stayed competitive throughout the entire war despite being designed before the fighting even started. That's the mark of true genius. Kelly Johnson went on to design the U-2 spy plane and the legendary SR-71 Blackbird. He became arguably the greatest aircraft designer in history, leading Skunk Works to create some of the most iconic planes ever built. And it all started with the P-38, a radical design that looked impossible, performed beyond expectations, and changed the trajectory of Lockheed from a struggling company to the world's largest defense contractor. The P-38 Lightning was the Model T of fighter aircraft. Flawed, unconventional, and absolutely revolutionary. It proved that sometimes the craziest ideas are the ones that change everything.